Hello, and welcome to TTRPGs and Kids Engaging Children in Tabletop Roleplaying. My name is Kyle Allen, and I am the moderator for this panel. Before we go around and introduce our panelists, I want to do some housekeeping. For the audience, I'm not sure if PAX has made this apparent, but this panel is pre-recorded, so we will not be answering any questions in real time. Instead, members of the panel are in chat to make any clarifications or engage in further discussion if you have questions. This panel is being run with safety tools. To ensure the comfort of everyone in the discussion, we are privately utilizing the X and an O cards. If you're unfamiliar with what that means, I encourage you to go to bit.ly/TTRPG safety toolkit. Every tabletop role-playing game can and should use safety tools, and they can be used in other facets of life, such as a panel. Yay! With that, I would like to pass it around to the panel to introduce themselves. Would you please tell everyone your name, pronouns, and any relevant information as to why you're on this panel in particular? So we'll start with Russ.
Hi, everybody. I'm Russ Wilde. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on this panel because I am the guide / creative lead for a podcast called PRISM Pals, which is an all ages podcast.
Thank you, Russ. And Finlay?
Hi, everybody. My name is.
Finlay, you're muted in Zoom.
Hi, everybody. This is my first virtual panel, but not my first panel altogether. My name is Finlay Logan. I use they, them pronouns. I'm on this panel because I am a middle school teacher. I've been teaching middle school for almost 10 years now. And I've also been writing and running RPGs for my students for over 5 years. And like I said, I've been doing PAX panels for a while, so it's actually my third consecutive year doing a PAX panel about kids and RPGs. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Riley?
Hi, I'm Riley RETHAL. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a tabletop game designer. And I've also been a camp counselor for the past 3 years and the tabletop RPG specialist at that camp for the past 2 years. So I've played a lot of games with kids. This also isn't my first panel about playing RPGs with kids, but it is the first one that people are watching.
That's a mood. That's a big mood. And Marissa?
Yeah, my name is Marissa Kelly. I use she, and I make games. I'm the co-owner of Magpie Games, and I've been invited because of my work on Epillion, a Dragon Epic, which is a tabletop RPG featuring dragons and how they grow up. My company has also released Masks: A New Generation and Wizard Kittens, the card game, which kids, young adults, and adults all enjoy.
Super excited to have you. Epillion is like the one game that I can GM and not feel like I'm going to have a panic attack. So, love it. Okay. And I'm Kyle. My pronouns are he, they. I'm a producer and cast member for Prison Palace Podcast. Hi, Russ. Like Russ said, we are an all ages quest to actual play. Did you say quest? Quest to actual play game. With an entirely LGBTQ plus cast. I have also worked personally for a K-5 elementary school in latchkey services and as a substitute teacher for 5 years, as well as a grades 4 to 8 camp counselor. Nothing TTRPG specific working with them. I just work with the kids in other aspects, not assets. Additionally, I have worked in kid-focused theater, including college and community experience. So, all over the board. As you may have noticed, this group is diverse in experience. Our discussion will be jumping around from what it is like to game with kids, produce podcasts or streams for kids, and designing all ages oriented games. It is a common approach in these discussions to focus on what it's like as an educator or a parent, but there are so many more viewpoints to explore, and we hope to reflect that. We also had a friend of ours and colleague in the community, B-Bars, was supposed to join us today, but unfortunately he could not make it. So shout out to B-Bars on Twitter. He makes Power Outage, which is a great kid-focused game. We also are working with Aram Bartian, who is helping me with post-production. So you will not see him, but he is doing lots of things for this that I could not. So thank you, Aram. With all of that out of the way, let's get started. So, this panel will be a sort of TTRPGs and Kids 102. I've been to conventions with panels about why you should play games with kids and create for them, and all the benefits with it, but that's been done and over and over again. If you need context as to why this is something we feel the need to talk about, then I encourage you to do your own research. Google's a great tool, and there's tons of articles and resources out there to educate yourself. Plus, we've only got like 45 minutes, so time is precious. This panel is about how to create content for kids, how to play with them, how to actually take the steps to doing all of these things as opposed to why you should do them. To start, let's talk about some of your favorite games that you've personally played with kids or used to create content for kids. What have you found that makes these games so suitable for your needs as opposed to other games that you might enjoy? So, would anyone like to take this, because no one made notes about this one?
I have lots of thoughts about this. Hi.
Riley, take it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm a camp counselor, and my camp actually did a bunch of stuff this summer online, which I participated in kind of like in April, before we knew that camp wasn't going to happen like in person. But my friend ended up doing a lot of the actual RPG stuff because my brain just couldn't handle half being at camp. So I ended up talking with them a lot about like what games are the best to play with kids. And obviously this is also something I've thought about when I was playing them. And the main thing that I've kind of found that is really helpful for playing games with kids is you need a game that makes it really easy for everyone to be on the same page. So like the thing with kids, if you've ever met a kid, is that they really like grabbing onto an idea that has nothing to do with anything else you're talking about and being like, can we do that? I'm thinking about that now, which I can relate. And so it's really good to have games that like let everyone kind of grab onto that same idea. Like, I don't like games that have these like long character creation sections that you're kind of supposed to do yourself, because then you'll have kids who are like get super into it, or like, I've written an entire backstory for my character, and some other kid is like, yeah, I wrote stats and I'm done. So that kind of like isn't great. And also just it's really good to make sure that everyone is involved, you know, even if you're not necessarily talking at that moment, that you still kind of have something to do. So you're always engaged with the story that is happening right there. So my absolute favorite game to play, not only with kids, but also, I mean, at any time, but especially with people who are new to indie RPGs, is For the Queen by Alex Roberts, which is a card prompt based game where basically you just kind of read a little bit of context, like you're on a journey with the queen, and then you're going in turns, flipping cards that have a question about like your character, your relationship to the queen, the land you're traveling through, something like that. And you don't have to make characters. The characters are made as you go. And what I really like about it is that it encourages asking questions, like follow-up questions. So, you know, you're always listening to be like, oh, what if the thing you said has to do with the thing I said earlier? And so like you get to create these really like intricate stories in like this really simple framework. Also, like, I will admit that everything that I'm saying also just is biased towards what I like in games in general, because I'm a kid. And so like I just really like card prompt games. I've played a lot of Spindle Wheel, though that definitely, you know, you gotta kind of understand that those themes can be kind of dark. Like The Quiet Year is a really good one because everyone's like drawing on the map. You know, so that's kind of the big thing for me, is that you want games that you're able to kind of either like segment, or it just kind of keeps going. So like everyone is kind of following along the same story.
I was with you until you said For the Queen, and I was like, For the Queen with kids? What? My mind was blown.
Yeah, it's I actually ended up like DMing with Alex Roberts over the summer to like ask about stuff, being like, do you have a print version so I can print more of these? All the kids want to play it. And like she was saying, like I never imagined like while I was writing it that it would be for kids, but I've just had so many people say that they've played it, and like there's always, my friend took out a couple cards when they played online. I only took out one about like the queen touching you. Like I don't want to deal with that. But like as long as you say like the love doesn't necessarily have to be romantic, like the kids get it. They're
Gotcha.
fine. It's great.
Anyone else have any?
I was gonna say, so this is a very popular game. A lot of people have played it. Honey Heist. It is a very simple game. The premise is very simple. You are bears trying to steal honey. Go and do it. And in addition, like it allows for suspension of disbelief that a lot of kids can access really easily. Kids are great at pretend. They're great at imagining things that like other people struggle with, especially people who play like heavy rules-based games often have a lot of difficulty just doing things for the sake of doing them and not because there's a rule to back it up. So I think that like Honey Heist or like a lot of rules light games, in addition, like Lasers and Feelings would also be a good system, especially with how many hacks there have been of Lasers and Feelings. We recently, for Prism Pals, did an episode of a hack of Lasers and Feelings that's called Magic and Mischief, which is a magic school based hack of the game. And it's really easy to roll for things, and it's really easy to do things, and there's no specific rules besides like have fun and like see what happens. So I think that like having those sort of games in the same sort of way that like you don't need to build your character right away, you don't need to know all the information about them. You can roll for it, you can figure it out as you go. I think that that really works well with kids. It gives them something really easily to grab onto and to know, okay, this is what we're doing, this is the goal here.
These are games that like the setup is very quick. It doesn't take more than like 5 minutes max, and then you're immediately playing the game. Marissa or Finlay?
Yeah, as I say, I have sort of like a two sort of side by side feeling about this because so I just for some background, I teach middle school, so sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, and I also work in a school setting, and I work with special education kids with language-based disabilities. So language generation is often pretty hard. And also like flexible thinking can be really hard. So like Russ, as you were saying, you know, it's better to have like open creativity so that kids don't get bogged down in rules. I have kids who love rules. They love like rules are amazing. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Mendez, who last year said something just that I thought was like, that middle schoolers and kids in general, but I see this a lot with my middle schoolers. There's this like drive to collect things that are similar but different. So you know, like My Little Ponies or Hot Wheels or Pogs or
Pokemon
not
cards.
Pogs anymore, but like you know, Overwatch guns. Like they're all the same. It doesn't matter. Somebody out there's like, I have a thought. But so for those kids, that's when I pull out the D&D because they are like, I want to do the thing that I saw my friends doing. I want to get in on that party. On the other hand, we have the kids who do want to be completely open, who want to just be able to make up whatever. And with those kids, a game that I love is Dinosaur Princesses, which I played for the first time at PAX. It's amazing. It's you know, you play a dinosaur who is a princess, but you don't have to be a princess. You don't have to be a girl or any gender in particular. You don't have to be a dinosaur. You could be a cat or a shoe or a train or a cloud. And it's a very player centric model because there's a kind of like The Quiet Year, there's a map making element. But the genre is like goofy Saturday morning cartoons. And you and your friends are coming together with your unique talents and skills to solve some, you know, benign but pressing issue in your community. And it always ends with a party. And it's been interesting to see like who shows up for these different games and what they get out of it and what they bring to it. And I think it's definitely like good as a DM or a game runner for kids just to come in with a couple of different tools in your pocket. Especially if you're working with kids who have learning differences or social needs or just something that is going to make it more challenging for them to latch on to something new.
That's awesome. Marissa?
Yeah, so from the publisher side, I don't have kids and I don't work with kids regularly, so it's not a prerequisite for making games for kids. And when I was a kid, my dad ran games for me. Primarily, he ran Traveler as a hack for us playing Star Wars, and he ran D&D a bit for me too. And I play tested Apillion, the game we were talking about at the beginning, with a bunch of kids a bunch of times, and it was a good experience that allowed me to see the kind of dynamic that my dad and I might have had at the table. And it was also great in general, regardless of the rules or how he hacked them or how much I personally tackled versus how much, was hand waved. Again, I don't have the best memory about which things were there or which recommend in that pace. But regardless of what game you're playing, I think that those kinds of family stories, however you make up your family, however whoever's at your table, those stories are going to stick with you. And just playing with whatever you have available is also very valuable.
I feel very reassured to know that you don't have to actually play or have kids to make games for kids. That just opens up the market for me. In your experiences, what is the process of working with employers, companies, organizations in establishing RPG programs or creating content with or for kids? How receptive are they? Is there any apprehension do you find? Marissa, when you were pitching Apillion, did they look at you like you had two heads?
Well, it was my company, so no.
Fair.
I didn't start out Apillion being a kid-focused game in my head. But honestly, selling games to kids is hard because kids aren't the ones buying the games. So when you're marketing a game, it has to be marketable, period. Like, if you want a broad reach, you need to make a game that reaches people. If you're just making a game that you're, playing with your class, you have a lot more options, a lot more tools available to you. I know a lot of people, teachers who've already made amazing games that they can play in the classroom. But when you're making a large scale product, it's just a whole nother animal. Everything from the art, from what we had to, moving forward, if I were to redo Apillion, for example, like, there's just so many things. If I'm marketing to just like a kid's audience, like the My Little Pony game that came out, like, we know that there's an audience of adults that will buy that game, right? That's not really a gamble. It's not really a risk. But for your own IP that you're developing that's for kids, it is somewhat of a challenge to navigate all those spaces on who is your audience, because it can't just be kids. It's got to be kids and what adults that are buying that for their kids. Setting up programs that incorporate that, like working with an established entity like a school or some kind of program that can help fund your development, is a nice way to sort of navigate those two spaces. Make sure it gets played, make sure it gets the audience, reaches the audience it needs, and make sure that you can like sustainably make it and make it the product that it needs to be.
And I can talk a little to the process of setting up with a school environment. I think if you're considering starting up an RPG program in your school, like, this is, I have to imagine, the best possible circumstances that you could be doing that. There's such a like sort of broad awareness of the benefits of playing, as Kyle was saying, like, we're not even covering that because that, it's kind of understood at this point that it is a beneficial thing for young people to be engaged in. And when I first started getting into role-playing games at my school, it was actually for the purpose of establishing better connections with my students. I had some kids who were just really going through a tough time and they were hard to reach. And I was like, I know what I'm going to do. I am going to put like monsters into their math worksheets. And it gave us like new things to talk about and established a connection. And teachers and anyone who works with kids knows it's all about relationship building. So when I first approached my administration, said I want to do this during lunchtime, really their only concern was that there might be kids who wanted to play but were excluded just because of space and time considerations. And that was easily addressed. We set up a sign-up sheet and a rotating schedule. But like, what an amazing problem that the real impediment was that too many kids might be interested in. And yeah, like anytime I've mentioned it to other teachers or families, the response has always been super positive, with families often wanting to know like how their kids could keep playing outside of school, like whether there were summer programs or after school programs. And so I'm so encouraged to see that response and also see that growth within the sort of society at large.
And we're now starting to see the manufacturers of games start to do programs to allocate funds or products to educators or community leaders to make these even more accessible for people to start up gaming with their kids. Like you can, I know B-Bar does it with Power Outage. You can just contact him and he'll get you a copy to start. You can start doing stuff. Quest is doing it right now. You can contact them for free copies. It's just they're trying to make the hurdles less so on the gaming aspects themselves. It's more so on your end as the educator. Russ or Riley, do you have any thoughts?
Well, for Prism Pals, we're a podcast, so like we sort of just had to establish it with each other. It wasn't really a hey, let's establish it with a big corporation or anything. It was more just like us talking at a group and wanting to fill a niche that wasn't filled already. We have an all LGBTQ podcast that's family friendly, which is a thing that a lot of people find as impossible. A lot of people think LGBTQ plus isn't family friendly, so you can't have those two pieces together. But having a place where kids can see themselves represented and parents can feel safe allowing their kids to see themselves, it lets that representation be there and it lets it be more prevalent. We've had some people comment on our show before saying that they like the representation, they like how it works, and we've had people say that they listen to the show with their kids, but we've never really interacted with corporations or like other groups that already exist who are like, ooh, you doing stuff for kids isn't really our sort of goal or anything. So we don't have a huge experience with that, unfortunately.
Going back to what Marissa was saying with like knowing your audience, it can't just be kids. That's a lot like where we were approaching things. Like our audience was never just kids; it was queer people and kids, and also RPG lovers. So like there was like a several different facets to it. The reason I love Epilion is probably because I just like saying, "You want to play little gay baby dragons with me?" It's just that's how I pitch it. Last time I played it was for Pride Month, and I was like, let's play the Moonbeam Festival. It's just Dragon Pride. Let's do it. Riley, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I also don't like so the year that I started doing RPG stuff, my second year of camp, the new assistant director, who's now the director, she's great. I really should have asked, like, I know that she kind of wants to keep like her internet Twitter stuff and like her camp director stuff separate, so I won't shout her out. But like basically I was a general counselor, which kind of just meant like, oh, we'll put you wherever we need. And that year they were like, we want general counselors to pitch electives. And I was like, hello, I would like to do RPGs. And so I did, me and my co-specialist, or, my, at that point, co-person, Rose, we did 1 week of a Dungeon World elective. And then we were kind of thinking like, it would be so cool to like play the Quiet Year and then play Dungeon World in it, like as a 2-week thing. And I just mentioned it to the assistant director. She's like, and it like kind of being like, oh yeah, like maybe we can do that third session. I don't know. And she's like, oh yeah, that's great. Let's do it next week. And I was like, oh, okay. And that just like was great. And so we ended up doing it the next session, and then both of us came back last summer to be like full-fledged RPG specialists. So yeah, it was just great. Never really had any trouble with it.
That's awesome. So we've touched on it a bit. So after you've gone through the process of starting your game or your group or your show, has there been a shift in perspective from people who you discussed it with prior to? Like for Riley, you didn't seem like there was a shift in perspective at all. It was always gung ho. But for Finlay, was there any kind of response that you saw that changed or was really positive?
No, it's continued to be a positive reaction from administration, from parents, and from other teachers. I think the only like one hiccup I had was my co-DM and I were at one point catching up on our weekend campaigns in the hall, and another teacher looked by and was like, gave us this look, and then was like, "Oh, well, you're talking about your club. It's okay." So we were probably talking about like chopping up monsters or casting some kind of dark ritual and summoning elder gods. Who knows? But as it's been, it's now been a couple of straight years of full year, every Friday running this club, and we're so lucky. We've got kids who've been with us from 6th grade through 8th grade, and we know they're going to go. They play RPGs outside of school. They get to their friends. They come in and show us their like miniatures that they painted, and their dice towers that they built. And so we know that like these are kids who are going to keep playing and like having this as a focal point, as a hobby for I hope the rest of their lives. But you know, we I think like in a school, it's a really important niche to have of like an activity of an extracurricular that's it's not sports, it's not art necessarily. It's uh it's like bounded by rules, and is structured. Kids know what to expect when they come in. They know that they're going to get like some social time. They know they're going to do something fun. Um, and they know that we're going to be there like telling the story with them. Um, and I think, that's something that is really needed among our population. Um, I think really like my only goal now, like the only thing I see that I want to change is that our school is primarily boys anyway, which just has to do with the way that uh, disabilities are diagnosed within our society, and that's a topic for another panel. But it's generally an all boys club, and I'd love to see more gender diversity in the room, because I just think it's gonna, you know, that kind like just changing things up and helping people see themselves in this hobby that might not is sort of our next goal.
Marissa, so this conversation has been a lot about how the kids with playing the games or adults in like a education standpoint have been receptive of it. How about with the corporate view? How has like market reception been as opposed to other more adult focused games?
Yeah, I think one of the awesome benefits of Kickstarter, which is where most of our business goes, all our products go through, most of them, Kickstarter during some point in their life cycle. And the nice part about that is you can gauge your reception almost immediately. So that gives you time to cancel your project, start it over again, like not have to invest everything in there. But when it does hit, I think that like with Apillion, for example, it was a big success, especially for at the time, in Kickstarter, that gave us, a lot of not just monetary value to move forward in making the game, but also just the like peace of mind that it was going somewhere. So I think one of the benefits is also when you're running the games with kids at the table. I think probably my favorite table composition has always been like one kid and a bunch of adults, all right, or one or two kids and a bunch of adults, because there's this really cool dynamic that happens where the adults get to model proper table behavior, like don't talk over somebody, pay attention to their scene. I know it's not your turn, but like let's be a good audience. And then the kids get to show off their creativity. And I think that's something that adults can overlook because we tend to do this a lot. We play games a lot. We have to think of things creatively. And then when a kid comes over and is like, yeah, but did you think about all these crazy things that they come up with? And you're like, wow, no, I didn't even think that was on the table. Thank you. And that dynamic is something really special to a mixed table that isn't just you facilitating for a bunch of kids, but is a collaborative process between adults and children, and that kind of grouping that kind of nurtures relationships between generations rather than separating them out. I think a lot about the design process for that as well, which is there's a thing here about designing for a parent plus a kid versus designing just for a kid, and what those things mean in a game and how you understand that feedback when you get it. So for example, like the whole Sesame Street Blue's Clues thing, where Sesame Street was designed to be appealing to parents and kids, so the parents could watch it as well and be okay with having it on the TV in the background. Whereas Blue's Clues was designed just for kids and aired on TV in the same slot at the same episode for a whole week, meaning that the kids could then watch it every day and basically learn the episode. But obviously that is not intended for parents' pleasure as well. So I think, again, it kind of goes back to knowing your audience a little bit. What program are you running? What game are you designing? Who in the RPG space is this product for? Is it for people who are used to playing D&D? Is it for people who are used to playing The Quiet Year? Is it for something completely else? Like knowing why you're designing it, what program you're designing it for, is all the more meaningful for how it impacts the people within it, or if it even gets to the table in the first place. So reception, I think, is a lot to do with getting to the right people as well.
What do you do differently, or how does your process look when creating for kids or gaming with them as opposed to with adults? I should just read the script I wrote for myself. How do you approach that? Russ, do you want to take this one to start?
So when you have a bunch of adults at the table, you can go into a lot of like heavy flowery detail. You can also like go into some darker subjects, like player death, character death, that kind of stuff, and having that happen at the table. You can go into those subjects, and there's a lot more understanding and like sort of compassion there, and sort of like people will get through it, they'll understand it, they'll communicate it. When it comes to making content for kids, I'm not saying that you have to dull all the content, but like there are certain topics that like aren't great for kids. Like there shouldn't be like lots of drinking, or like some things that parents won't agree with in certain cases. For example, with Prison Pals, part of keeping it all ages means that there's no sexual content in the show. It also means that like we don't swear. There's no swearing at the table. If it does happen, it gets cut out. We went through, when we first started the show, we did a small period where we just kind of ran the show without talking about things, and the show was very dark. And then around episode 8 or 9, we sat down at a table and were like, okay, this show isn't the show we want to present to people. The show doesn't represent what we want to do. It'd be great if it was for adults only, or like for an older audience. And so we sat down, we talked about it, and we came up with a list of content that like we weren't going to have in the game, or content we weren't going to approach. So it's just that there are certain things that are technically off limits, not just because kids might not understand it, but also because parents won't approve of it being in the content for children. It's the same reason there's rating systems on like movies, TV shows, etc., etc. So that's kind of how we approached making content for kids.
Yeah, I was similar to that. I think, yeah, being in a game with kids, I'm much more explicit about where the boundaries are than I would be with adults. And part of that is, like a rating system. And part of that is also with kids. There's a couple of things going on, especially with my students, that they don't necessarily know what the genre-based expectations are. They might not know that in a fantasy story, we tell this kind of narrative. Our characters should act this kind of way. They should make these choices, but not those choices. Because, if you were, and as like adults who have read a lot of books and seen a lot of media, we kind of have a sense of like where a narrative might take us, but kids really don't. So there have been times, and this kind of goes back to what Marissa was saying about modeling, where I've really had to take a kid aside and been like, that thing that you are trying to do here, I want to say, I want to let you do whatever you want, but it's not working, and we need to take this in another way. Like, you cannot steal all of these gnomes' clothing. Like, that's it's just weird. It's just weird. And so, like, I think there are conversations and like levels of explicitness that I would go into with kids that, in an adult game, folks would just, I would give folks much more open space and let them kind of take the narrative where it's going to go.
I think it's important when playing any games, like I said in the beginning, safety tools have become such a very important aspect of playing RPGs with anyone. When you have them in place, whatever you choose to use, because there's so many different ones you can use. Like playing with kids, there are tools. I think like the sunflower, like the color flower, whatever it's called, where you can. It's very kid friendly, bright and colorful, using like the stoplight colors green, yellow, red. Whereas where you could be playing and something like this could happen, and you could just be like, we're gonna touch the yellow, we're gonna stay away from that one. Or just to redirect focus as a table, to keep these types of subject matters, no matter what they are, under control. Riley or Marissa?
Yeah. So for me, part of how I separate stuff is like how I do it with kids versus adults, and then some of it is more like based on experience with like games and specifically indie games. So one of the main things that I do with kids that I don't generally do with older people is the first thing I do is introduce the concept of play to find out what happens, because I just, especially in the limited time that we have when I play games with kids, I know that kids will like have like, some of them will get like all of these ideas in their head, like, I know exactly how the story is going to go for my character, and I just want to prime them to be like, that's awesome, like think of as many of those as you want, but don't be disappointed when the rest of the table goes another way. So that's like the main thing. Also, a safety tool that I like to use at all times, it's my favorite one, is asking questions as opposed to making statements. So like if we were doing a character creation and like I thought that my character should be Kyle's character's rival, I don't want to be like, hey, Kyle, we're rivals, because if Kyle doesn't want to do that, that's kind of a shame. Either he's going to have to deal with it, and that isn't fun, or he's going to have to hurt my feelings. So a much better way to do it would be like, hey, Kyle, are we rivals? And then you can be like, yeah, totally, that's awesome. Or, no, what if this instead? So that's like a thing that I like to do for everyone, because I think it's like the best. The other thing that I do with kids that I don't generally do with adults, sometimes I will if like people are really new to indie games, is I will introduce the X card. I'm not a huge fan of the X card because it's kind of like saying, oh, just tell me if I do something that makes you uncomfortable, without really giving any ability to like do that, except for saying literally like take the initiative and stop the game when you are already feeling uncomfortable. So I'm not a huge fan of it as like a specific tool, but I really like it as a way to introduce like, hey, you're allowed to not like things. You were allowed to say, hey, that thing that you just brought up, I don't want it to be brought up. Or how about we bring it up in this other way? Like, I feel like in a lot of like traditional game spaces, if kids are like playing more traditional games, or just if they're doing other activities, like they might feel like if someone else says it, then like it's too late. They can't say anything. So it's important to me. Basically, I didn't start doing this because like I felt weird about the X card, but then I'd have like 13-year-old kids who were trying to be edgy, and they'd bring up something, and I'm like, oh, hold on, we're playing the quiet here. Let me pull this card out. Let me introduce the X card. I'm X carding that. No, and I figured a better way to do that would just be to bring it up in general, because I think it's just really important to me that like kids understand like this is a collaborative storytelling medium, and like we are all in charge of the story, and that means that you are also part of that.
And if I could get in here also, I noticed that we are mentioning a lot of things that are about like slowing the roll when things get, go to a place where we don't feel comfortable or where they really just shouldn't or can't go. But I also want to highlight some things that I do and that others could do that are more positive. Because, and again, this goes back to modeling. One of the things that I love best about like just tabletop game culture and the community of people that I like to spend time with is that we're so like into each other's characters. People really celebrate each other's accomplishments. I know that in a lot of apocalypse games, there's in the like DM instructions, there is, be a fan of the player characters. And I think kids need us to encourage them to do that. Kids can be very self-centered. They are the focus of their own world. Nothing wrong with that. But in a kid game, I'd be more likely to really take time to, encourage people to draw each other's characters, or to, put in a mechanism to say like, all right, this person is doing this action. What can you do to like build on that? Even if it's not part of the mechanics of the game, but like almost character icebreakers. I think like adults will sort of develop that positive culture a little more naturally, especially if they're friends. But kids have to learn it, and they have to see us like encourage it and model it.
One of my favorite safety tools to use is Stars and Wishes, where you go around and you like highlight something that someone else did and what like your favorite moment that they did during the session, or you say what you hope to see in future sessions of the game you're going to play, just to instead of like you said, instead of focusing on the negative aspects or bad things that might have happened with safety tools, pushing it towards a positive and flipping it, making sure everyone walks away with something hopeful or encouraging, so that it always ends on a good note. And Powered by the Apocalypse games do that a lot with their written mechanics. Like Masks, I'm thinking of, has like their team moves where when you do something, when you are like celebrating with someone, you have a move. Or Apillion has the virtues that you have to encourage. You have to reward when you see people display them. So I don't know if Marissa wants to talk about those.
Sure, I think it's a nice way to step onto what you asked about, people who are interested in creating a game with these things. I think for me, it usually comes back to, what do you have to say as a designer? So what stories do you want to tell, and then how do you make the game the best that it can be? So for Apillion, for example, it didn't begin, like I mentioned, as a game for kids, and I resisted that framework pretty heavily. I wanted to play dragons, and I wanted to be like just like cool token stuff, but with dragons, because dragons are way cooler than people. So I started designing the game, and the more that I got feedback, I realized that it became clear that the kinds of tones that are strongly associated with kid stuff or children's or young adult stuff was what that was already present in the game was what people were connecting with the most. And the game needed to encompass those tones more directly to really be the better game that it could become. So, you know, sometimes that doesn't work out as smoothly and you have to, you know, kill your darlings and come up with a new way to approach something else that you're trying to do or design in that space. But I think being willing to change and shift and listen to feedback that, and I don't mean literally someone has to articulate, this would be better if it was a kid's game, but just be willing to work through what tones are being said and what the associations are before you complete your game and before you market your game. Because I did kind of still hit this weird middle mark that I'm not sure I would do again, where the book itself is sort of presented as more of an artifact, like in character thing, than a like big, bright, colorful, like eye grabbing thing that it could be. But the content ultimately, you know, is where those changes were easily made and could really make them sing once I nailed it down into the kind of story that was about growing up and about making changes and like helping other people in that kind of content. Like I said, whether or not you agree that that's just for kids or not, it's definitely strongly associated with younger audiences.
Get through it as quick as possible. But so the next question is, let's take this a step further. So we've been talking about how to not approach, like Finlay said, how we've been like, the negative aspects or like the how to steer conversations away from deeper topics or topics we can't focus on. But a lot of role-playing games are designed and utilized to explore those deeper topics. They are much more diverse and profound than just regular fantasy or sci-fi or supernatural themed games that we play for pure escapism purposes. Can we talk about how we've used role-playing games to explore more sensitive subject matters in the context of kids? What is that process like? What do you feel is important in that endeavor specifically? Anyone want to take that one first?
Sure. So personally, I try not to underestimate children. If adults don't want to play the game, it probably won't be particularly moving for kids either. And I think that, like you mentioned in the setup, it's about being able to explore things and work with things with the people at your table, and that's a really neat part of storytelling that we're doing together in tabletop RPGs. And I think there's a difference between learning the system, or there's something about learning the systems and rules that seems key. With kids, there's a fine line between helping out because they're having a hard time and helping too much that can then make them disinterested because they aren't discovering things or making progress on their own. So it does, while it does vary from kid to kid, obviously. But I think that there's a whole spectrum here from creating a space so that the game, or creating a game that is as simple as possible, to creating a game that a kid can discover the depth but doesn't have to. So if you're working on like, I think it goes back to, if you only have a certain kind of game that isn't simple, it isn't easily hacked on the fly, I think you should still give it a shot. You can still tell stories with it. And the fact that there is more for them to discover, but you might be doing some of the heavy lifting as the facilitator, I think that shouldn't put you off it. And then being a little transparent if the kid does seem interested, and showing them what you're doing, because then they can do it themselves.
Russ, why don't we talk about the specific
stuff in Prism Pals?
Yeah, go do the Prism Pals thing.
Okay. There's two big moments that I think of. So we have our characters, and they all have big backstories, obviously. But one of my players came up to me and said, "Hey, I think my character's dad has depression." And that was something that myself, I have depression, I have mental illnesses, and we sat down and we talked about how to approach it in game. And the way that we approached it was that the character had seen the signs of it, but it was never really thrown out there in a sense of like, I have depression in like an angry, screaming sort of match. It was still that character's father, it was still someone that they cared for. And there came a scene where that character asked their dad, "What's happening? What's going on?" And he basically said, like, "Sometimes I get sad." And there's not really a reason why. There's not really a like justification for it. It just happens and it's part of who I am. And I have to deal with that. And sometimes there are good days and sometimes there are bad days. And we played through that scene and it was very kind of, at least for me, it was very moving because it felt like a conversation that a parent would have with their kid about that sort of topic. They don't need to know all the dirty details, but they can know what's going on with your life and see that like you're human in a certain way and see that like you aren't perfect. And then the other example that I'm thinking of is from recent episodes of the show. Um, Kyle's character has a backstory that deals with abuse, with being abused as a child, and trying to recover from that harm and that trauma. And we've talked about it in character in the same sort of way. We never went into dirty details, but it's always been something we've discussed and we've talked about and we've handled. And it's been subjects that people who like the show and families who like the show have said that they like how it's portrayed because it's not ignoring it, it's not glossing over it, but it's also not getting so far into it that it feels like it's overwhelming in any sort of way. Um, so I know that's how we've been approaching it, is to treat subjects with respect, with kindness, and mm, and care. Like you just have to care about the subject and not just like throw it out as like a joke or anything or any sort of harmful material, because then the kids will pick that up and repeat those sort of jokes. If you show the kindness in your work and the content that you present, then they'll repeat that kindness. Like we've talked about the modeling effect, they'll model that same kindness back.
Like, I think that role-playing games are a really cool way for kids to, like, be able to experience and, like, kind of talk about that kind of stuff in a way that isn't, like, gonna hurt them, in a way that, like, is very safe. Like, I've played games where a big focus of it was, like, reclaiming colonized land. Um, I think like the best example I have is we were playing For the Queen, and there's a card that says like you love someone else in this retinue, and basically these two kids decided like, oh, our characters are like a couple and they have to keep it secret from the queen because she's homophobic. And like obviously immediately I was like, okay, is this something you're cool with exploring with the rest of us? Is this something everyone else is okay with exploring? And they were, and so it ended up, being not like a huge part of the game because there were a bunch of other things that were going on at that point. But it was something that they could just say like, this is a thing. And those two kids actually ended up like getting really invested in those characters. And during free time, I like facilitated a little like I don't remember what game it was, but like a little game where they could like talk about how their characters got together in the first place, which like was adorable. Um, but I think it was really cool, like that they could just tell this story that kind of was a reflection of their own lives, in a way that like was in a safe place where they felt comfortable doing that.
I have to say, I'm really like blown away by both of those stories. And Riley, especially, I was at a panel some years ago where an educator recounted a time where romance or physical affection came up in a game, and she like shut it down and distracted the kids with like a shiny object. And I remember feeling like that was so, it felt really like violent in a way. And I think that's a great example of how like you can, depending on the age of the kids and like what your lines in the sand are, like you can deal with romance or, you know, more maturing topics in a way that's safe for everybody by like getting consent, checking in, and like making sure it's like within people's lines and veils. And yeah, I think going back to what Russ was saying about like not shying away from things, you know, any adult going into anything with kids is like you've got to be prepared to be honest, um, emotionally honest and like materially honest. Um, if you are like lying or hiding things or like refusing to validate and honor what kids are bringing, they'll see that. Um, on the other hand, like if something comes up and you need a minute, just like you would for a player, you know, you can say, "Huh, you know, whoa, I wasn't expecting that to come up in our story. Let's take a minute and see how it's going to all play out." Um, but like kids have, if you give kids the space, I think they will bring things to you.
I was trying to think of like some cool way to like segue into closing this, but I couldn't. So like, here y'all, folks. I hope the audience likes that. That was a great conversation, and you just made really good points. And my brain said, "Cool." So, with that, we are going to be ending our panel. Let's quickly go around and do some outros. Where can people find you on the internet? Personal lives, if you want to do that, I don't know. If you have a preferred method of contact, if someone wants to contact you, professional inquiries or whatever, and if you have anything to plug or promote right now. Russ, do you want to go ahead and do that first?
Sure. My name is Russ Wild. You can find me on Twitter at RussWildest. I am also the guide for the Prism Pals podcast, which you can find at Prism Pals on Twitter. Yeah, that's all I really have right now.
Cool. And Finley?
You're muted, Finley.
You're doing so good.
So, since this is a professional outing for me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Finley Logan on LinkedIn. And I'd love to talk to anybody who's, you know, got questions about gaming at school. It's definitely a pet topic of mine. And that's, yeah, that's those. School is my project. Please, everybody, be safe out there. That's my plug.
Good plug. Riley?
Hi, I'm Riley Rethal. You can find me on Twitter at JaceAddax. That's JACEADDAX. You can find the games that I write at metagame.itch.io. And please talk to me about playing games with kids because I just started a school that is like year long, so I can't work at camp anymore, and I'm sad about it.
And Marissa?
Yeah, again, I'm Marissa Kelly, and you can find a bunch of our games at magpiegames.com. That includes Apillion that we've been talking about here, Masks, as we mentioned, Wizard Kittens, our card game, as well as Root, the tabletop RPG. And many, many more.
All right, and I'm Kyle. You can find me on Twitter at SuperQueero. I'm also a game designer now, kind of, sort of. I'm trying. I'm on Itch.io at SuperQueero. I've made no games for kids so far, so I'm doing great. You can also find me on the Prison Pals podcast, and I want to do another shout out to Aram Vartian, who will be helping with post production on this. He can be found on Twitter at Vartian. And he also has a website that you can find on Twitter, but I didn't look up his website domain, so oops. He is a podcaster, producer, photographer, video editor, all these other things. And thank you all for joining us for TTRPGs and Kids, Engaging Children in Tabletop Role-Playing. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your PAX online. Goodbye. Stay safe.